All right, hey everybody, and welcome to our second in our webinar series dedicated to Copilot for Microsoft 365. Of course, we are recording this webinar and it is going to be made available on demand if you happen to want to come back to this or share it out as well. Today, we are discussing information security and protection for Copilot for Microsoft 365. Really excited to be here and to be speaking with you all today on what Copilot does, how it can transform your business, and what data protection you can do now to accelerate your Copilot readiness and adoption. So we do have time dedicated at the end of today's presentation to answer any question that you might have. As you do have questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. Rachel is going to be managing our Q&A section. And again, like I mentioned, we are going to be coming back to those towards the end of today's session. So thanks all for joining, and let's go ahead and jump into our agenda for the day. So first, we are going to introduce ourselves. We are then going to look at AI in the modern workplace. We'll then focus on Microsoft 365's Copilot lineup. And then we are going to get into the core of today's presentation, which is going to be addressing risks and threats, and then talking about a little bit of our service details as it relates to security. And then, as mentioned, our session is being recorded. So if you do need to come back to it or share it out, we'd love for you to take a look at the recording after today's session. And then if you do have questions, feel free to put them into that chat. So some introductions of ourselves. My name is Tim Evans. I am an adoption change management consultant at Reply. So I am focused on people enablement and people skill and adoption with almost everything Microsoft. And I'm joined here by Steve. Steve, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure, Tim. My name is Steve Lazara. I'm a security solutions consultant here at Reply, and my focus is primarily on data and identity protection and across the board overall Azure protection and M365 security.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. So when we think about how our session's going to run today, I'll be more of our MC, and Steve is our absolute expert when it comes to all things security. So just before we get started, I wanted to look at a few other webinars that we have in this series. You may have joined our AI in the Modern Workplace webinar already. If not, you can scan that QR code to view the on-demand recording. And then we have two additional webinars upcoming on November 12th and December 10th, specifically covering enabling Microsoft 365 Copilot adoption on the 12th. And then for the 10th of December, Copilot for Microsoft 365 extensibility. So thinking about how we can extend Copilot to your other current applications in plugins and graph connectors in your organization. So all great webinars. I encourage you to grab that QR code now, or at the end of today's session, we are going to be sharing more information on these sessions as well. All great webinars covering all things Copilot and more chances to come and listen in to some of the experts and maybe hear the same MC's voice as well. All right, so just one more introductory slide here. Just if you haven't heard who we are Valorem Reply, a Microsoft-focused consultancy that really prides itself on delivering exceptional modern work tools, security, and Azure services. Although we at Valorem Reply are particularly focused on the Microsoft stack, we're actually a part of the Reply group, which is about 200 highly specialized consultancies really all over the globe focused on all different technologies. Since we have a close partnership with Microsoft, we were lucky enough to be a part of the early access program, or early access and jumpstart programs rather, for Copilot. And we're a qualified partner to deliver the Microsoft funded Copilot opportunities. So again, we've been working day in and day out with Microsoft tools and specifically Copilot as it continues to grow. I work with Copilot almost daily, it seems. Steve, just about the same. We're really thrilled to be delivering this webinar, and we hope that you take some tips and information regarding Copilot and Copilot security from this today. So first, as we kick us off, let's think a little bit about AI in the modern workplace. Before we go into Steve's expertise as it pertains to security, we really need to set the foundation of how AI is acting in the modern workplace and who essentially is using AI in our modern workplace. So if we look at our statistics here, we can see that, and this might be shocking, that 3 out of 4 people are using AI at work. And usage there has nearly doubled in the last 6 months. So this is all from the 2024 Work Trend Index annual report. And what we can really see is that this tool, although it may seem new to a lot of organizations, is really being adopted quickly and being used frequently within organizations such as your own. So if we look at the flip side of this, if we look at our next slide, there is another side of these statistics. Specifically, we can see 78% of AI users are bringing their own AI tools to work, a practice that we're not so fond of, and that we are using the acronym BYOAI, which is really a trend across all different age groups. Steve's going to talk about the security risks about this just a little bit later on, but I really want to hone in on the fact that 78% of that 75% are folks that are bringing their own AI tools into the workplace. Now, if we look at other statistics as well, 52% of employees are reluctant to admit that they're currently using AI for fear that they might prove themselves as either redundant or replaceable. But if we look at actually other statistics, surveys have shown that leaders are really wanting to use AI to drive productivity and inspire creativity in their organization rather than reducing headcount. So a couple of key numbers here, again, with that glaring one being 78% of folks are subscribing to the BYOAI methodology that Steve's really going to hone in on a little later on and drill some security holes into that practice. So a little bit more foundational knowledge before we get into security specifics. We want to think about the entire Microsoft 365 Copilot lineup. So when we think about Copilot, we've got all different tools accessed in all different applications. But when we really think about it, we're talking about all this different potential and all of the opportunity as well. Microsoft's growing AI lineup is built on the foundational Copilot experience that many of us have used in what was known as Bing Chat. But then if we bring in our organization's E3 or E5 licenses, we also get, as you can see here, commercial data protection, which helps keep our information private while also leveraging this power of AI. So when we think about it, really, what's great about Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that you start to bring in this enterprise security, privacy, and compliance into the fold. And you can ensure that Copilot really isn't out there surfacing content that it shouldn't be. And Copilots for business functions are then really building on top of all of these other Copilots for Microsoft 365. So if we take a look into the architecture here and we look at it from a bird's eye view, we can kind of see a complex structure here at play. But if we really simplify it, we can follow this design to understand that Copilot is using the graph and semantic index of your organization to formulate a response to the prompt that a user might create. Then it's sending it to that large language model to transform that response into new and original content using natural language. We also have this service boundary around our entire architecture. And then I also want to bring in Steve here to kind of talk about our security or our potential security risks when we highlight specific points of this architecture. So first, Steve, I want to focus on the user prompt. What can you tell us about specific security or potential security threats when it relates to this segment of the architecture?
Thank you, Tim. So user prompts are where the user interfaces with the tool that has been presented. And you want to be certain that whatever user prompts are sent in, that they're correctly coded or correctly configured, and that you educate your employees on how to properly use those prompts. The reason being is that you're introducing information into the system. And if you don't have controls wrapped around it, you may introduce inadvertent information. Sometimes that can be done as code that's introduced in to give explicit response or to find things, introduce malware, or just introducing some changes that are going to impact how the M365 Copilot tool itself works within your environment. And to kind of identify, though, on that service boundary, it's ensuring, though, that at least your data is not exposed outside of your environment, and that your company's M365 tool, Copilot tool, is at least searching only within your environment. So they're not looking at necessarily something that's going to introduce, say, something that's going to reach outside of your environment to grab a malware packet or bring it inside the environment, but that user prompt does give that opportunity for that external to internal breach of something, potentially through just a inappropriate configuration of what's sent in.
Absolutely. And I think that's too, Steve, I think that's a good point as to where an adoption consultant comes into play, is the information that we share to end users and how folks are using Copilot is really important as we think about security practices. And just as you said, right, ensuring what we are feeding into Copilot is absolutely secure. So then we look at the next step in the architecture that we want to put a little bit of a magnifying glass on, and this is the pre and post-processing rather, bits or segments of this architecture. Steve, what can you tell us here about potential security threats?
Well, Tim, you want to lock these down to be certain that you know what's being transitioned from the prompt directly to your semantic index. What you don't want is you don't want to have any capacity for there to be any injection or any change to what's being sent in, and also any injection or change of what's coming out. You need to be certain that you know where that data is transitioning as far as putting network controls and network security around it so it can't be pulled around.
Yeah, absolutely. So then looking at our next portion, more specifically, let's take a look at that semantic index that you were mentioning.
Yeah, so this is kind of the decision tree that is utilized. And because it's the decision tree, number one, you want to be certain that you don't want to allow anybody who isn't appropriate to have access to there. So you want to lock it down and put in your controls to ensure that only the appropriate administrative people have access to it. The second thing is you're going to want to have cutouts so that you know what decisions are being made. There's a few things that have kind of come into the lexicon for AI tooling, such as hallucinating or dreaming, that AIs sometimes do. And as the AI itself adjusts based on the return responses that it gets, it's going to be changing the weight and the bias within this decision tree. And you want to know and at least have a capacity of being able to understand what that means to the decision itself. There's a potential here where a number of invalid or just as times change, drift from the original intent to where it eventually will get to. can occasionally just go in the wrong direction. So some oversight and being able to have those cutouts is important. Again, you're not stopping the processing, you're just ensuring that your administrative staff and support teams are able to know what's going on, and only appropriate administrators and support staff have access to this decision tree.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the final lens or magnifying glass we want to take a look at, Steve, and ask you just for a little bit more information is over here on the large language model side. What can you tell us there about potential security threats and possible protections there?
So once again, you have a set of data that is your company's data only, and that's what's being used by the tool or M365 Copilot to make, to take that decision tree and then to translate it into that common parlance. So the large language model, which also translates into that response portion of line 6 there, those two things you need to be certain are also managed and controlled. You don't want to have anybody be injecting information that shouldn't be there, which again controls, who can access it or what can access it when. You also then want to be able to validate what that response is going to be. Some good examples of this is you want to be certain that it does not use inappropriate language, that it doesn't do a redirection, say, to any of your, to the company's competitor information that might have picked up. It's just to make certain that, hey, what information it uses, what data it knows, its vocabulary of those responses is under your control and under the company's appropriateness. And that, again, that gets back to things such as just standard common courtesy. You don't want it to use inappropriate language. You don't want it to say anything that it shouldn't say, and you don't want it to inadvertently divulge a company secret or anything like that, even though that user coming in from the user prompt is still an internal person. They may not know that, hey, that large language model, that response back contains information that is not valid. So you want to be certain that that can be cleaned up and made certain that it's evaluated and controlled, which kind of keys into that response piece again for line 6, having that physical verification, and Tim, that user training. They need to know what the user prompt should be, and the end user also needs to be able to have some kind of like grain of salt check, or just a check on that response to make certain that that's what they're getting is correct.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think too, when we look at this, it looks like and is a complex structure. But when we put in these best practices and we think about each step and each portion that we've put the magnifying glass, the metaphorical magnifying glass up to, we can really create a secure system and ensure that our organization is following the best security practices. And of course, that's why we have people like Steve. So Steve, with that, let's transition over here to talk about risks and threats landscape. And you can kind of take us through more detail.
Thank you, Tim. So looking at the threat and risk landscape of M365 Copilot, there's just kind of basically 3 different key areas around the data. One of those is the data overexposure. You want to be certain that the data that is allowed for the Copilot can see, even though it's leveraging what the user who's using it can see, is controlled, that it's not getting any inappropriate or invalid information, PII data, or false numbers, historic information that shouldn't be, that's out of date, or information that's not available for public consumption. And that's going to give you your data overexposure. And the problem with data overexposure is, number one, you can get a loss of customer trust, and number two, you could have an exposure of something that that the company does not want, and can then put the company in jeopardy of things such as a lawsuit for inappropriateness, or loss of different proprietary value. The second piece there is your data loss, mentioning that loss of data value and loss in data proprietary information, is really key. You want to be certain that what is exposed is what should be exposed. You don't want somebody that's leveraging M365 Copilot from HR to create a job placement and inadvertently grabbing proposed salary instead of the actual salary of it, because then what's going to happen is that will cause a problem. At the same time, you also don't want somebody in marketing doing that and inadvertently grabbing the specs of what you're selling instead of the actual just data catalog that they should have access to, and exposing it, thereby diminishing your competitive edge in the market. And finally is data non-compliance. Data non-compliance is because all of our companies, especially here in the States and globally, have different compliance requirements depending on where they are in the world. And you have to be certain that whatever this product exports out, or that response on it, is not exposing inappropriate non-compliant data, what we're going to cause either an ethics violation, or worse, is a compliance violation that can lead to heavy penalties to your company as far as those risks. The other point is that you also want to have this because a lot of this goes back to the concept that your threat data targeting is growing. Data itself is a large target area for threats that are occurring, and you want to be certain that you mitigate those threats. One of the key aspects of mitigating those threats is setting up with leveraging products such as Purview to set up and identify and protect that high value data. And you want to be certain that you're protecting it to ensure that it's, the just-in-time data concept almost of saying that, hey, this person should only see this information. There isn't a truly negative piece other than the fact that it's going to impact your company so harshly when that occurs. This is a large component of what's going on today, both the injection and targeting the data for locking it down or doing some type of malware attack, or and then also exposing it and being able to leverage that within your own company. So having that security of that data is key part of that zero trust principles and where you want to use and controls. Now, 99% of all attacks, as we all know, have been reported. Multi-factor authentication and following the basic principles of zero trust, of validating both the user and the device, etc., help extend and do those protections. But you also, though, want to ensure that you're keeping up to date, good security hygiene on patching everything needs to be, and that includes patching M365 Copilot once it's in place. You can't let these things go. Then you also need to ensure that you are extending your data, your detection and anti-malware to cover these new pieces and these new tools that come into your environment. You want to evaluate and get these reports out of these products into your security report just to see where there may be risk coming, not necessarily from a attack, but just from a potential inside exposure, where something's beginning to run out of date. And you want to know where your data is. You need to know where it is, who's got access to it, and what they're doing with it. It's crucial to understand that piece of information, because that is kind of the intellectual property or the heart of a company, is the data, be it a process that the manufacturing is doing, chemical codes, contracts, acquisitional information. All types of data can be used very differently against a company that it really couldn't or shouldn't be done. So moving forward is you need to address those risks. So the steps you can take to address these risks are within the Azure environment, again, because we're talking about Windows 365 Copilot, is key. The first one is you want to take a look at your secure score for your tenants. This is going to give you a very baseline best practice evaluation of where you are today and realistically where potential holes are. It's a good start of the conversation around what you need to do to improve your security posture overall. M365 Copilot does not generate more external risk in this fashion. It simply highlights a number of areas that may not have been, because it enables that data to be available or marketed out to your end users that previously didn't. They had access to, but they didn't realize it, and so it kind of puts a big spotlight on that. So which is why this M365 Secure Score is a great place to start with what you want to do and how you want to do it. And again, it's a good conversational start. It gives you that first technical piece and gives you the technical steps then that you need to align with your business steps as you roll forward with improving your security posture. Part of that includes deploying the M365 Copilot protections. These are explicit pieces that are designed to protect your organizational data. Again, not from external exposure. This is simply internal accidental exposure. And you can do this with an E3 with simply putting classification labels and sensitivity, using classification to apply sensitivity labels over your data so that you know what data is protected, who's got access to it, and ensuring that you know what data is where. That will also include things such as data loss protection, which ensures that your data is not egressing inappropriately, but then also retention policies so that you don't have legacy data that should not be utilized because it's out of date, removed from your environment. And then you also want to use the Context Explorer to evaluate the results as you do that. Now, all of those are available with an E3 license to initially set up. The big piece is to also then move to the E5 once you understand what's going on, because what that's going to do is that's going to enable you to extend what you're doing into an automation portion so that it's not dependent on the end user anymore. This is going to allow an automated piece, and then the end users can adjust if you desire to allow them to do so, to manage their business practices and align the data with that. But again, you can start with an E3 and get the foundational built, and then move up to the E5 to take that foundation and automate it. And those are very key things, because a lot of companies, a lot of places, Tim, they think, I don't want to spend the money to go to E5 right away because I don't have this built. Well, you don't need it built. You can start with the E3 and then go to the E5 to automate it. And what's key on the M365 Copilot piece is that once it's automated, you don't have to worry about it because it will even cover data when it's at rest or data that the individual users are not using at the time. Because remember, Copilot is leveraging that user's access to cover all of the data that's in the cloud. Not and when I say in the cloud, is focusing on Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Viva, etc. But it's going to look at everything, even if the user hasn't touched it in 5 years. And that's a big piece of knowing what they may have exposure to. The methodology of implementation for this is discover and identify, figure out your data, your classification and protection for how you're going to do it. Test it, make certain that it works with what your business needs. You're not inadvertently locking things so people can't do their business, etc. And then deploy it. And include then to extend it. You can extend these products long-term around other SaaS applications. Now remember, M365 Copilot has not been around for a very long time. These AI products are relatively new, but they're growing at an exponential rate at not just what they do, but what they can access and do. So you want to build out and stay ahead of that curve, because what you don't want is you don't want to have something such as M365 Copilot or any AI product out there that has access to these things and then not recognize that, it's got a connector into, say, your AWS databases, and suddenly it can go and get that data as well. So extending and discovering your data protection across the board is key. And that, I know we're focusing here on M365 Copilot, but from that first couple slides, as Tim brought up, you want to do this because you don't know 100% what those people are, what employees are bringing into your environment. Key do's and don'ts for this, is that you want to understand and label your data, you want to monitor and track it, and then you want to set security on it. And you need to continue to educate your users This isn't just a one-time deal. This is a continual education program, especially on how to leverage prompts, keeping up with industry trends. You want to be certain that security is ongoing. We've done this with Exchange over the years, with phishing and malware. Now, don't click on bad links. And we do, a lot of times we'll do campaigns in Exchange with this. You want to do the same thing with M365 Copilot, or rather with the data within your environment. What you don't want to do is you never want to make the assumption that the AIs are perfect. Again, these are early pieces that have just come out over the past 2, 3, 4 years. Even at that point, you still want to put human checks in place, and you want to do consistent validations that this is what's going on and that it's, appropriateness, et cetera, as we covered, when we talked about the large language model and the API and the app, algorithms. You need to know what's going on, and your end users, though, are the ones that need to make sure that they don't make those assumptions. You also can't forget to update it. I'm sure everyone has heard the phrase, patching. This has been ongoing since, laptops and workstations have been around. You have to patch your systems, patch your operating system. M365 Copilot is no different. You want to patch and update the tool set to make certain that things are, secured, and anything new that is developed is being updated both in what it can do, but also in what you don't want it to do is being prevented. So, we've talked a lot about data. We also need to know where M365 Copilot is pulling this data from. Now, the good news is, as I mentioned on that security boundary, when Tim and I were talking earlier, it's internal to your company. So this isn't going to go grab some strange data off of the internet. It is also not going to be exposing your data to the internet, but it is going to have access within your company's environment to everything that user leveraging that tool has in OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, and Viva. So you've got to be certain that the tools and your data protections are controlled around all of them, all of these locations, even though they are all cloud and it's not extending anything on premise. There can still be information in these pieces that are unexpected and will give you then an unexpected result. So knowing what's in there, having that classification and label and sensitivity labeling across every location is very important, because that's what will control what the graph can see. Now, once you've got your data protected, you're going to want to extend your protections. Remember, security, from a security perspective, is a journey, not an endpoint. And so you can set those up with E3. You set up, you get that automation with E5, but you then want to also ensure that you have these additional peripheral pieces. We talk a lot about how it's the end users within your company that have access to Copilot. Well, that means that you want to protect that end user account. So you want to involve your identity and access management to ensure that that person who's accessing Copilot is that person from a protected device or a compliant device, to make certain it is that person. Then you're also going to want to implement app protection policies. This ensures that there's kind of a wall between your organizational data and personal data, especially on mobile devices. As people begin to extend these products to include your cell phones, you've got to be certain that, hey, your mobile personal phone does not mingle with your company data as well. And then again, going back to that E5 automation aspect, once you get to that, so that you can set up that policies that are designed for that zero trust and automate and cover your data anywhere, anytime, any place. So finally, we're kind of taking a look here at threat protection, which is important for the entirety of M365, and integrating that into the zero trust principles. Now, when looking at this, one thing that I really want to also have a call out here is you also have your Defender for Office and Defender for Cloud apps. And this kind of also allows you to sanction those applications to ensure that only AIs that you as a company are allowing into your environment get into your environment. If you've got 70+% of your employees are bringing AI into their work environment, and you don't know what they are or who's using what or who's doing what with it, there's a very big possibility that they're going to be bringing in something that they shouldn't. So that Defender for Cloud Apps, integrating with your Defender for Identity, your Defender for Office, is really going to assist in addition to what we're talking about on data, because it's going to protect your data, but it's also going to protect what is and is not allowed in your environment. Of course, you're going to continue to have your threat protection evaluations, and you're using Azure AD Identity Protections or Entra to ensure that you only have appropriate people accessing the tool. And then, of course, Defender for Endpoint to validate that there's nothing sitting on a laptop or a device kind of waiting for you to connect to the environment so that it's going to grab something that it shouldn't or inject itself into that stream of what's going on. All this combined, that's what gives you that zero trust M365 protection around your entire environment of M365, not just protecting your M365 Copilot usage. So it's an environmental end-to-end piece that you want to look at and not just a single piece. Now, it's also important to note that these are all tools that exist today. There are advances that are going on continuously within Microsoft to protect both the environment, the device, and M365 Copilot. One of the new things that have come up is, the embedded AI. M365 Copilot or Copilot pieces are currently embedded in your operating system, in the newer operating systems that are coming out. They're also being brought into the various tools. So, we only have O365 services like Word, Excel, Teams. Right, but that is being added in. So Copilot is being added into these different tools to assist with things such as automatic translation, automating pivot charts, doing macro lookups. These are, transcribing, even like this Teams meeting that we're on, having this transcribed. Copilot could transcribe this for you and give you a summary of this entire presentation, which is very, very powerful. It goes back to that large language model because you don't want it to inadvertently translate dessert and desert, even though they spell the same, but they're used very differently within an environment. The second thing, beyond the functionality advances, is there's security advances that are just being brought up constantly. Security is the nature of our business today. You can't do anything today without it. So there are additional guardrails that are being put into place and being leveraged and being built by Microsoft to put on this. One of the newest ones is called restricted SharePoint search. And this is a very, very interesting, and from a security perspective, very powerful tool, because what it does is when a company's implementing Copilot, you can use restricted SharePoint search to restrict users that have a Windows license and a Copilot license to a small subset of up to 100 SharePoint sites. And only those 100 SharePoint sites will be available for Copilot to search, which allows users or allows customers to leverage Copilot today in a proof of concept model and control what it sees and does without having to worry about unintended consequences or unintended exposure from other sites other than these first 100. So that's what's key is bringing in your security team, making certain that they assist with this, and they can help ensure that there's guardrails put into place as you're deploying these new tools, so that it's a managed deployment while users are being educated and can assist in generating assist in doing those educational end user education growth on these new products. So the call to action really is, look, if you're going to use M365 Copilot, that's great. You want to do it. It's going to increase your productivity phenomenally. However, you've got to be certain that you implement it in a managed and controlled and secured fashion, so that you don't have high sensitivity information leaked. You want to configure the protections are in place, And then you want to have baseline protections as you grow this, so that when you are able to extend this and feel comfortable as a company to extend this to everybody in your company, that the baseline protections are in place so that you don't, cause a giant blast of inappropriate information, controlled information, or any emergent data loss, as well as confusing your employees or having somebody, give incorrect information, especially if you're using this for service desk support or help desk support on lookups for different companies or different applications, etc. So the call to action is really just to put in a baseline fence. If you're going to go with M365 Copilot, which we highly recommend because of its just the power that it grants your productivity, to ensure that you roll it out intelligently and in a controlled fashion, and don't just, hand a box of matches to everybody in the company so they can have a go at it. It just isn't, it doesn't really work for how we want businesses to work. So first steps in that call to action is to set up a Copilot protection readiness. This is an assessment that, you can do, we can do. This is something that we provide here at Valorum Reply, and we will go through your entire environment and take a look to say, hey, are you ready for this? Who's using it? What are they doing with it? Is that secured, protected? And then you give the access. It ensures that this product is being implemented successfully and implemented securely and in a managed control, so that as you're improving what you can do, you're not exposing yourself to any unanticipated dangers or any type of piece beforehand. Type of work. Now, in addition to our security assessment for M365 Copilots, we do have threat protection workshops, data security workshops, and Microsoft Sentinel workshops. And these are all funded workshops through the CSI program within Microsoft. We're happy to come in and work with you to get these workshops set up to evaluate your environment and kind of take that assessment view from your end to end. And it'll give you also an understanding of the unique value of Microsoft security technologies and solutions across the board. And if you would really like to learn more about these programs, not just the funded security workshop, but also the threat assessments and the M365 preparation workshop, please reach out. We're happy to help and work with companies to do this. Our goal is to keep you secure. And that's, these are Microsoft funded to ensure that your company gets secured. So within, and then you ask, well, okay, who's Valorum Reply and why can they do that? And I know Tim gave a spiel at the very beginning, but just to give you an idea of who we are within the security practice, is our security portfolio covers the entire Microsoft security suite. Our competencies are in cloud, identity, access management, information protection, governance, threat protection, endpoint protection, etc. Valorum Reply has made a significant investment in ensuring that, hey, we have the security certificates, but also the real life practice people that have come in and joined our team or been grown within our team from across all the Reply companies to come to Valorum, the Valorum portion of us, because we're Microsoft specialists to do this, which gives us both a deep knowledge, extensive experience across multiple verticals. So healthcare, finance, manufacturing, retail, etc., but also across the entire spectrum of it. And then we coordinate internally with our own teams, and then when we coordinate with our customers to give you a broad solution that's going to provide for you what the ideal security solution is for you. There's no one size fits all security solution in existence, but what there is a set of baseline security best practices that can be leveraged alongside your business values and business needs to do that. And we cover the whole portfolio from Sentinel, Defender to Priva, Intune, Purview, and Entra. And it's an end-to-end security solution. So that is the direction that we as Valorum Reply's security group goes for, is across the board. And when we do this, we're happy to work with you to ensure that we key in on the key parts that your company needs, and then also give you a broader view as to what's going on security-wise within your company for each of our engagements. Now, our service areas are 100% aligned with the Microsoft solutions, the zero trust, endpoints, information protection, et cetera. And the other key is we're continually learning. Because security is always evolving, we're always growing, and we're going to be doing those learning of the new pieces and new things that are coming up, and ensuring that our teams are up to date of what's coming, what has been as well, but also what's up and coming. So it's the legacy pieces all the way through the current pieces. You know, when we talk about cloud security engineering or information protection, you know, endpoints and devices, all those different things have got some classic pieces such as certificate utilization, but they also have the more modern pieces such as Intune certificate authentication. And you're going to want to have somebody that knows both, which is what we do here. And we align ourselves 100% with the Microsoft solutions because we are and really value our Microsoft partnership as a key partner with Microsoft, because it just makes sense given what we're doing to align to that, just because, you know, it's very streamlined at that point.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. I feel like every time we chat, I get to steal one great analogy from you. And I think the one that I took from today was the box of matches, right? When we think about summarizing our presentation here, we're not giving a box of matches to the organization and letting them run wild with AI. We're having the proper best practices and security best practices in place as we develop and create with these tools and also learn with these tools. So I love that box of matches analogy. Just really quickly to see or to give a review of what we've covered. We talked a little bit about the foundations of AI and specifically Microsoft's Copilot lineup. And then on the flip side of that, what needs to be protected. So thinking about that architecture and raising the metaphorical magnifying glass to each bits or segments of that architecture. We then talked about the critical steps that need to be taken when protecting data that can be accessed by Copilot. Steve then jumped in to data protection for E3 and E5 licenses and kind of differentiating between the two. And then just lastly there at the end, we talked about where we at Valorem Apply can assist with securing your data. So we have a few other slides here, but I think to be mindful here of time, I'm going to jump directly to questions, and then we'll look at what's next just after our kind of 10-minute Q&A segment. Rachel, was there anything that we wanted to surface right now?
I don't see anything. It's been quiet in the chat. You guys feel free to drop anything in there. Any questions that you might have for Timothy or Steve now, we'd be happy to answer it. Or follow up with you later. If you'd like to come off mute and ask your question live, just raise your hand and I'll give you the access to turn off mute.
All right. So while we're waiting for questions, while we're waiting for questions, I'll put on the what's next slide just in case you all want to join future webinars. But yeah, I'll hang out here in the chat. Steve will hang out. If not, thank you so much for joining today. But yeah, we'll monitor the chat just while you're thinking of your questions.
Thanks, Timothy. And yeah, the marketing address is there if you guys need, if you'd like access to the on-demand recording or the slides or any of the links that we shared today, please feel free to use that contact as well. We'd be happy to connect you to the right people or provide you with those assets. You guys did such a great job. No questions, no notes.
I love it. Everyone's on the same page.
Great. Doesn't look like anybody has anything, so I think we can give everybody a few minutes back. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Timothy. Appreciate your time.
Thank you,
and
Rachel.
Jeff, anybody has any questions following up, please feel free to use the contact information you see here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Tim.